Hey teachers, have you noticed that there are so many virtual whiteboards to choose from? And with so many options, it can be really hard to know which one is the best. So in this video, I'm going to review 3 of the top virtual whiteboards. We're gonna look at Google Jamboard, Whiteboard.Chat, and Whiteboard.fi, and then I'm gonna let you know which one I think you should be using as an educator. Before we get started, if you wouldn't mind liking this video and subscribing to my channel, I would really appreciate it. We create all of this content here on my channel for free, and liking and subscribing is just a quick and easy way that you can show support so that we can continue to create free content for all of you. Now, I also want to let you know a little bit about the way this video is going to work. I'm going to give a quick review of each of those virtual whiteboards. Then we'll go into the pros and cons of each one, and finally, we'll wrap this video up with me telling you which one I think is the best. And spoiler alert, there might be more than one option depending on who your students are and what it is that you teach. So without further ado, let's get started. The first virtual whiteboard that we're going to talk about is Google Jamboard. And if you're already using Google apps such as Docs and Slides and Classroom, Google Jamboard is going to integrate very nicely with those because it is another type of Google app. Now, Google Jamboard is your basic virtual whiteboard. It includes tools such as drawing, typing, erasing, making shapes, uploading images, and adding sticky notes. Jamboard also allows you to add a background image to each of your boards, which is great for creating drag and drop activities because those backgrounds cannot be moved by students. Now, when I showed you what it looks like inside of Google Jamboard, you could see there's not a whole lot of tools and features there. It is very basic, and that can have some advantages and it can also have some disadvantages. You're not going to have as many functions and features. You're not going to be able to use it for as many things as you can with other virtual whiteboards that we're going to talk about today. But having something very basic can also make your life much simpler. For example, it's not going to take you long at all to figure out how to use Google Jamboard. You will literally be able to figure out how to use it within minutes, especially if you're already accustomed to using Google Apps.
Oh, I love it even more.
You're also not going to have to spend a ton of time training your students how to use it because it's very simple for them to figure out, especially if they're accustomed to using Google Apps. Next, let's look at Whiteboard.Chat. And Whiteboard.Chat is significantly different from Jamboard. It has so many more tools and functions. So if you are looking for a more advanced virtual whiteboard that you can do a lot of different things with, this could potentially be a great option for you. Now, when you take a look inside of Whiteboard.Chat, you're instantly going to realize that it looks very different from Jamboard. There are so many more buttons and tools and things that you can click on here. So in addition to all of those tools and functions that were available to you inside of Google Jamboard, you're also going to have a lot of other tools, functions, and manipulatives. And just a few of those additional things that are available to you will include dice tools for creating games and interactives, the ability to create math equations, calculators, more shape and line options, musical instruments, math manipulatives, which is one of my favorite features inside of Whiteboard.Chat. You're going to have graphic organizers and a whole lot more. In addition to all of these tools and features, Whiteboard.Chat also gives you the opportunity to interact with your students in a whole lot of different ways. You can create virtual bingo games, enable your students to raise their hand and ask questions in a virtual setting. You can animate text and images on the board. You can also create board games, and you can embed videos, links, and websites directly onto the board. There's literally so much that you can do here. Now, having a lot more tools, functions, interactives, ways to collaborate with students is great, but it also offers some disadvantages. Whereas I told you with Jamboard that you're going to be able to learn it and teach it to your students really quick, Whiteboard.Chat is going to take you some more time to learn and figure out how to use because there's just so much there. And with that said, it's also going to take your students more time to learn how to use. But I will say that once you and your students get the hang of it, you are going to be able to do so much with them through Whiteboard.Chat. It's a lot more than just presenting information to them. You're going to be able to collaborate with them, and they're going to be able to collaborate with each other on a whole new level. Now, one other downside to using Whiteboard.Chat is I have found that on occasion it can be a little glitchy, but over the past few months as it has been growing in popularity, I've noticed that their engineers have been making a lot of updates to it, and those glitches are occurring less frequently. So hopefully they'll keep making updates and soon there won't be any glitchiness to it at all whatsoever. I'm definitely optimistic about that. The last virtual whiteboard that we're going to talk about is Whiteboard.fi. And when you take a look at Whiteboard.fi, you're going to notice that it's much more similar to Jamboard compared to Whiteboard.chat because there's not as many tools and functions there. It's on the lines of being a more basic virtual whiteboard. So some of the tools that you're going to have with Whiteboard.fi include drawing, typing, erasing, making shapes, and uploading images. So your options here really are even a little bit more limited than Jamboard because Jamboard does have some extra things like sticky notes that you can use. Now, another way that Whiteboard.fi is similar to Jamboard is that you can upload a background to your board that cannot be moved. So this is once again great for your drag and drop activities, or if you have something that you want students to see, but you don't want them to be able to manipulate it in any way. This can be really helpful. Now, one thing about Whiteboard.fi that is different from the other virtual whiteboards that we have looked at is that you have to actually push the content out to students. And what I mean by that is with Jamboard and with Whiteboard.chat, whenever you're writing on the board, drawing on the board, using manipulatives on the board, whatever it is that you're doing, typically your students are going to be able to see what it is that you're doing instantly. With Whiteboard.fi, you're going to add whatever it is that you want to the virtual whiteboard, and then you're going to have to click a button to push it out to students so that they can see it straight away. And this can have some advantages and disadvantages. It's going to take a little bit more work for you to get your content directly out to students. Not a lot more work, but there are some extra steps involved. But this could be helpful because virtual whiteboards are meant to be collaborative. So you're contributing to the board, but you might have students contributing as well. And if you have some concerns about students putting something that may be inappropriate or something that might be embarrassing, it does give you a chance to review their work as well before you allow the entire class to see what other students are adding to the board. So in that case, it could be helpful that everything's not instantaneous. Now, the biggest problem that I have with Whiteboard.fi is that it is not entirely free.
No! No! No!
I know this is a very popular virtual whiteboard, and I don't understand why it's not completely free. You do get some features for free, but then to use other features, you have to pay for those, whereas Jamboard and Whiteboard.chat are both completely free to teachers at the time of making this video. So now that we've reviewed each of these virtual whiteboards, let's look at the pros and cons of each, and we're gonna go back to the beginning and start with Google Jamboard. Now, the pros for Google Jamboard is that it is very easy to use, and this is also a great collaborative board, whether it's you collaborating with students or students collaborating with each other. Now, the one con to using Jamboard is that its tools and functions are more limited. You're not going to be able to do as much with it as you can with some other virtual whiteboards. Now let's look at Whiteboard.chat. Some of the pros associated with Whiteboard.chat include that it has so many tools and features. It has gaming options, and one of my favorite things is that it has math manipulatives. Especially if you're teaching virtually, it can be really hard to get math manipulatives to your students, but you can find pretty much all the math manipulatives that you need right there in Whiteboard.chat. This is also another virtual whiteboard that is great for collaboration. Now, the cons to using Whiteboard.chat is it is going to take longer for you and students to figure out how to use it because it has so many tools and features. The other con is that it can be glitchy, but like I said, I've noticed that that's getting better, and I'm optimistic that that's going to completely go away hopefully soon. Last, let's go ahead and look at the pros and cons for using Whiteboard.fi. Now, the one pro that I have for Whiteboard.fi is that it is easy to use, but I also want to say this. While it is easy to use, I think Google Jamboard is even easier to use because Whiteboard.fi requires that extra step of pushing it out to students, whereas Google Jamboard is very straightforward and everything's happening at once. Now, the cons to Whiteboard.fi is you're not going to have as many tools and features. It is a very basic virtual whiteboard. And then the biggest problem I have with it is it's not completely free. You do have to pay for a subscription to use a lot of its features. So now that we have thoroughly reviewed all 3 of those virtual whiteboards, let's get to the moment you've been waiting for. Which one of these virtual whiteboards should you be using? And when I look at this list of 3 virtual whiteboards, I automatically remove Whiteboard.fi from the list, if you couldn't already tell when we were going through everything. To me, it just doesn't make any sense to pay for a virtual whiteboard when everything that's there inside of Whiteboard.fi you can get for free through other virtual whiteboards. So maybe if Whiteboard.fi offered something special that the other ones didn't have, I would say yes, go ahead and pay for it. But right now it doesn't do that. So there's no point in paying that extra fee to use it. So that narrows us down to Google Jamboard and Whiteboard.Chat. And when it comes to these 2 virtual whiteboards, it's honestly a tie for me. And which one I tell you to use is going to just depend on your unique situation, what students you teach, and what subject you teach. So for example, if you are just looking for a basic virtual whiteboard to share content with your students and to get them to collaborate with each other, you really don't want anything fancy, go with Google Jamboard because it's easy for all parties involved. If you're looking for more tools and features that are going to allow you to play games with your students, interact with them a little bit more while you're teaching content through the virtual whiteboard, things like that, Whiteboard.Chat is going to be the better option for you. I also recommend that all math teachers use Whiteboard.Chat because of those math manipulatives. Like I said, especially if you're teaching virtually, it is really hard to get manipulatives to your students who are working at home. And so this is a way that you can do that, and it's free. There you have it. If you want a basic virtual whiteboard, Google Jamboard is it for you. If you're looking for something more advanced so that you can interact with your students on a bigger level, you can give them games, math manipulatives, things like that, then use Whiteboard.Chat. So when you're deciding which one of these to use, really take some time to think about what are you going to use it for, how often are you going to use it, and how much time do both you and your students have to learn how to use it. When you think through those questions, I think it's going to make the answer obvious to you which one you should be using. But Google Jamboard and Whiteboard.Chat, both great options. Now, if you're using a different virtual whiteboard, let us know down in the comments which one it is that you're using and whether you like it or you don't like it. And feel free to let us know for any of the virtual whiteboards that we talked about in this video. What do you like about them? What do you dislike about them? How are you using them? I find going through the comments and reading what other teachers are doing just to be so helpful. And then once again, if you wouldn't mind liking this video and subscribing to this channel and just helping us grow in that way, we would really appreciate it. So until next time, happy teaching!